Hello, I'm Professor Rico Burton, and I volunteer with AARP's Metro Phoenix, Arizona State Office. February is officially Black History Month, but AARP started the celebration with the observance of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday on January the 15th, and that celebration is going to continue throughout the month of February. AARP strives to develop a year-long appreciation for Black history and culture by spotlighting some of the innovations and contributions that African Americans have made, some of what you will see through this evening's virtual tour. We are so glad you could be here with us this evening, and we hope you enjoy the program. Now I'm going to turn things over to Mr. Martin Shore, AZ's hip historian.
Folks, welcome to the show. Get ready to meet your host for the night, Arizona's very own hip historian himself, Marshall Shore.
Well, hello, good evening, everyone. I'm so happy you can join us for, oh my gosh, we are going to have so much fun tonight because, well, actually, I'll go into that in just a moment because I just want to say I'm so happy you're all here. Now, I know some of you are joining us on this February 4th. Some of you are on Twitch. Some are on YouTube. Some are on Facebook. Now, I know some of you have a chat session off. If you have a question, please throw it over there as we get ready to have an amazing time here on the Arizona History Happy Hour. So, we've been doing these since March of last year when we started. And so they just keep getting better and better. So what can you expect if you've never seen one of these tonight? Well, we always do a little bit of Arizona music. We do a show and tell because, I've got a house full of stuff and it's all story-based. So I have to talk about that. As well as we do a little bit of Little Arizona. And tonight, I love how I was researching one thing and going to use that. And through the course of the day, that completely was derailed by, I think, an amazing story that for me is going to wind up being a road trip. But you'll have to stick around for that. I don't want to give away too much. And then, of course, we always have trivia, and you'll see what we mean in just a little bit, as well as special guest and a cocktail. So if this is your first time watching, you might wonder, who is that man on my screen and why is he there? How did he get there? Well, my name is Marshall Shore, and a little over 21 years ago, I was working in a library in Brooklyn. Why, in fact, it was a Carnegie. Looks a lot different than the Carnegie we have here in downtown Phoenix, but nonetheless, still a Carnegie building. And in fact, there's a little bit of snow in that photo, which is one of the reasons why I'm no longer there. I got tired of that wind, that snow that some of you recently experienced. I mean, we even got hail. So when I decided to make a move, I decided to swap libraries for the Harmon Library, which was 7th Avenue and Buckeye pretty much. And so when I got there, there was this rich oral tradition of the community. And so that was very welcoming. And so I decided that I need to share more of that. And so that's exactly what I've been doing since that time, is sharing some amazing stories. Now to get here, we loaded everything we own into a big orange cube, a U-Haul. And their International World Headquarters are right here in the Valley of the Sun. Now, when we moved here, we promptly moved into a beautiful 1956 ranch. Now, my house is pretty much a time capsule. If you went into my kitchen right now, there's what it looks like. All that buttercream yellow tile with the matching in-the-wall oven with no window. And, only recently I realized in this photo, if you take a quick look, you'll notice that oh, and of course, there's that thing. All right, so my stovetop, the push buttons are inset in the wall. And so I was making tea the other day and the light wasn't lit. So I had to run down to my local hardware store and I got a brand new bulb put in it. So now that little red light lights up again. You know, sometimes it's the little things that make you happy. Oops. I think we just had a little glitch there. So now, as soon as I got here to Arizona, all I kept hearing about, there was no history here. But I knew that wasn't true because every time I went for an adventure, I came face to face with so many amazing people, places, and stories. And then there's that post-war boom that I think in a lot of ways made the Arizona that we all know and love. All those GIs that either were stationed here, trained here, or passed through on their way to somewhere else. And after the war, they were moving to Arizona in huge numbers. Now, I'm also known as the Hip Historian. Now, you might wonder, how does one get a name like the Hip Historian? Well, every year, February 14th, which is actually coming up right around the corner, we celebrate here in Arizona Statehood Day. And back in 2012, we did 100 years of statehood. And so there were events happening across the state. And on that Valentine's Day at the state capitol, they had a main stage, all kinds of events going on. And so someone gave me 15 minutes to do anything I wanted to. And so I chose to talk about one of my most favorite events that most people don't remember. It was called Mask of the Yellow Moon. It ran from 1926 to 1955. At its height, it had about 5,000 or more students kind of performing, making sure the show went off. It was one of those things that was touted right up there with Mardi Gras as something that everybody needs to go and see. Now, it was woven into the curriculum so that everyone got involved. Now, I said it ran till 55. Now, actually, later on this evening, we're going to be talking about Carver, the segregated high school in South Phoenix, just south of downtown. And they were allowed to participate after the late 40s. And so I always like to say I'm talking about the Mask of the Yellow Moon when it was much more inclusive. And I was lucky enough to find 3 dresses in a box. Now, these dresses all are from the late 30s. And so I had these amazing friends wander around while we talked about Mask of the Yellow Moon, played some of the music, and talked about some of the history and how it really was a rite of passage for so many of those folks. We talked about a dozen women, and they were all like, it was the first time they'd ever felt larger than themselves, a part of this huge production that they played an integral part in. Now, that's a lot of what I was doing about a year ago. You know, I was doing lectures kind of across the state on all kinds of things. I was doing a variety of tours, and all of that pretty much came to a screeching halt. Now, I am happy to say on the second Saturday of every month, we do a walking tour of downtown, kind of a haunted history walking tour. We are fully masked, my co-host Deb and I. We also wear microphones with speakers on our hips so that way people can hear us. So it's a lot of fun, especially walking around downtown as we see all these cranes and new buildings going in, to be able to talk about this history. Now, I know the one we've got coming up on the 13th of this month is sold out for a birthday party, but we do have tickets available in March for that tour. And we're all outside, so we are all socially distanced and oh so safe. Now, if you would like to reach out, you can always look me up on Facebook on Marshall Store Hip Historian, as well as on Instagram. I'm Hip Historian, and even email. When we're all done, if you have a burning desire to be like, hey, you know, what about this? Or, you know, I'm going to ask some questions of folks because I know there's lots of folks out there that have been places I haven't been. And that's going to come up in a little bit. I like how I keep saying, you know, stick around because there's more and more participation, engagement. Now, I will ask you on the bottom of your screen, if you're on Facebook, there's a little button that says share. If you click on that button, you can show all your friends how much fun we're having with Arizona history. Now it's time for show and tell. So, because of tonight, decided that we should talk about Song of the South, which is a Disney movie that I remember seeing as a kid. And, I know last week we talked about Disney and how I became kind of a little bit obsessed with Walt Disney in Arizona. And so I was researching and came across this. Oh, and it doesn't come through. I don't know if you can see, but it does say filmed mainly in Phoenix, which I was rather shocked by. And so I started asking friends that were Disney files, and they were like, well, there's a rumor having been filmed way out on Indian School, way, way, way west. And I'm like, well, that doesn't fit. And so I kept plugging around, and I discovered that there was the McDonald Ranch out in Laveen. Now, she was kind of a trendsetter, but she also had the Uncle Remus picture, Song of the South, was filmed on her ranch. And so I actually have a copy of it that I invited a bunch of friends over one night, and we watched it and actually had a talk back with Dr. Lester from ASU, who's going to be a guest on actually a month from tonight. And that's going to be a really interesting discussion as well. Now, it wouldn't be a happy hour without a cocktail. And I am so excited to always talk to PJ because he creates so many different cocktails that are really storytelling. And so let's see. So this one has all kinds of stuff. And let's see if we can bring up my silent bartender. Oh, and there we go. And so now you'll also notice there's some new things on the bar, which have important placement for this evening. We'll talk about that later. And so this is called the Fieldman's Flip, which is done to commemorate George Washington Carver. PJ started off with a Caribbean style peanut punch. He added in a little 4-square rum for crop rotation and even some corn liqueur for George Washington Carver's education in Iowa. And so the beauty of the cocktails are not that I have to mix all those different ingredients together. I just get this. A jar with my cocktail in it. Oh. And so now he also did give me a friend of his this is golden nutmeg, which I had never heard of before. So I was like, well, what's golden nutmeg? Well, it's actually nutmeg that's been coated in gold that he said is on the flag for Grenada. And so it was like, you just put a little dash like that. And so there we have our oh so special cocktail for tonight. Now, in case you're wondering what's in it, there's all those different things in the cocktail. So I'm so glad that I didn't have to figure out all that. But PJ spent lots of time in R&D, and that's what he cooked up. So I'm so excited because, we always have guests on, and tonight is no exception. I mean, we have a really good friend who's coming on. And so first, let me introduce Paul Tercio. I'm sure I butchered that last name. I probably got it partly right. So maybe a 3 out of 4 he'll give me. We'll see. But Paul is a first-generation Argentine American, a longtime resident of Arizona. He's worked in small business community by helping economic empowerment initiatives. He has a passion for natural history, anthropology, and world history, and he is now serving the George Washington Carver Museum as a volunteer resident coordinator. And Paul is working to bring the stories of their African American experience in Arizona to life. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Marshall. I'm excited to be here with the hippest historian I know.
Oh my gosh. And we're going to have so much fun. And we also have another guest, my friend Brenda. Hey, Brenda. So tell us about yourself.
I don't like talking about myself. You know that, Marshall.
I know, but okay. So I know you are the executive director of Arizona Humanities.
That's very good. What I'll do is I would tell you what my mother would say about me. My mother would say she was a bright young graduate of Yale Law School. That's what she would have said years ago. I'm not so young anymore. And I've been working with both nonprofits and for-profit corporations for years. Was the director of the Maricopa County Bar Association. And for the past 11 years, have been the director of Arizona Humanities, which is the Arizona chapter of the National Endowment for the Humanities. And what I do in my spare time, which I don't have a lot of, but I'm in love with the George Washington Carver Museum and Cultural Center. So I would high five Paul with my enthusiasm for that organization and what I'm learning about it. The more I volunteer as the secretary on the board of directors, the more I'm learning about the rich history of Carver in Arizona.
Indeed. And I think that may be where we first met.
I think it was because we were actually housed in the Ellis Shackelford House in downtown Phoenix across from the Burton Bar Library. It's a 100-year-old Victorian. And it was being renovated with city bond money. So we had to find a place to stay for 6 months to a year while they were kind of tearing the place apart. And we hopped to Carver. And we actually stayed in the library and worked from there. And while we were there, you were visiting with museum students. You had created an exhibit that was displayed. And so they actually set the exhibit up in the main hallways and had a reception and invited the public in and toured the space. And that's how I got to know you and see what you were doing in the community and also with ASU students. It was like bringing history to life. And also teaching students about the importance of history. So it was really pretty exciting.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So let's do this and then we'll go. So there we can see the beautiful building. So where is Carver?
You want to give them the exact address, Paul, and location in Phoenix?
Yeah. Actually, I have to pull it up really quick.
Well, I know it's 7th Street and Grant.
Yes.
So you've got the ASU Herbert School of Fine Arts is right there on the corner.
Yes.
Then you've got the old school district that was like we have the it's right in the middle of the heart of the warehouse district.
It really is. And if you look at the physical address on a map, and I know Paul is probably thinking about all the stuff inside the building, and I'm thinking about where it is outside the building. We'll talk about that. But it's 415 East Grant Street. So if you head down 7th Street or 7th Avenue, you're going to turn left or right and follow Grant Street as it curves around. And it'll take you right into the heart of the downtown area that's in South Phoenix, sort of the tip of South Phoenix, where there's a lot happening right now.
There is indeed.
Galvanized Phoenix.
Yeah.
It's not far from the ballpark. There's new condos and lofts going up. The Bentley Art Gallery is located nearby. There's also schools and businesses. So there's been a lot of growth in the last 3 or 4 years. And also the light rail has extended just past downtown Phoenix and the cityscape area within walking distance of Carver. And so we're right where, if there were routes that were expanding, where new routes are being extended, and all the community, little new leaves are shooting up all around us, including in our own space.
Indeed. And we'll get to that in a little bit. So we always do trivia here. And so when we do trivia, it's a little different than if you've been to trivia in a bar. No, speaking of bar, I probably should have a sip of my...
I'm the designated driver. I'm drinking water, okay?
Well, I'm sitting at home in my home office. So there you go. So with our trivia, so what we do is we'll go through the questions. We'll take a little bit of an Arizona music break and then go through and tell the stories or explain those answers. So if you don't know what the answer is, it's a multiple choice, so just take a guess. And then we'll go through and talk about and explain. So the goal is that you actually will walk away knowing more than when you turned on your computer and joined us. So that is the whole goal, is we're going to share some great stories. And Paula's found some great photos and put together some great questions. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Now you can keep track of your score on, let's see, you can do it on a pad of paper nearby. Someone did send me a photo of them with a Sharpie on their leg. So, I guess you could also keep track of if you had a paper plate and some chocolate syrup. Now, I'm not suggesting that and then when you're done, you can clean the plate off. Well, it doesn't have to be paper plate because, we want to be friendly for the environment. So you can use a real plate and do that. But the goal is to have fun, enjoy yourself, and learn. So, all right. So who is ready for some trivia? Oh, and I also forgot to say that we actually have prizes. So keep track of your score and you might receive exactly
A little cactus dog.
Now, is it Tokidoki?
It's Tokidoki. And so he's green plush. He's about 5 inches by 5 inches, and he doesn't bite.
And it's Tokidoki, because who doesn't love Japanese tchotchkes? So there you go. All right. So our first question is, in what year did the George Washington Carver High School building officially open to students? Was it A, 1912, B, 1918, C, 1926, or D, 1954? So one of those years is when the Carver High School opened its doors officially to students.
So take a guess. Come on, people.
Exactly. Even if you don't know, it's one of those. We don't do trick questions where it's like, oh, none of those answers were right. So I wouldn't say that some of the questions aren't trick, but I think we're actually good tonight. I don't think we have any trick questions coming in. So, all right. Question 2. Who was the first principal at Carver High? A, Mrs. C.B. Caldwell. B, Mr. W.A. Robinson. C, Mr. H.B. Daniels. Or D, Mr. G.W. Carver. So, who was the first principal at Carver High? All right, question 3. What was the Carver High School mascot? A, butterflies. B, mesquites. C, javelinas. Or D, monarchs. So the Carver High School mascot was one of those critters. All right, on to question 4. The Carver Monarchs won multiple state championships in what sports? A, basketball. B, track and field. C, football. Or D, all of the above? All right. And we're at that midway point, question 5. This Carver High educator was acclaimed for their abstract and expressionistic art. Was it A, Ella Fitzgerald? B, Eugene Grimsby? C, MacArthur Binion? Did he have a casino in Vegas? Or D, Emma Amos? So, all right. So one of those was a highly acclaimed artist in their own right. Question 6. This Carver High graduate went on to invent numerous consumer products, such as the Viewmaster and The plastic garbage bin. Who was it? A. Herb Finn, B. Calvin Good, C. Elizabeth Harris, or D. Charles Harrison? So one of those folks was an industrial designer and actually quite famous. All right. So on to question 7. In 1949, after years of budget shortfalls, this Carver High School president challenged the status quo to increase the quality of education. And who was that? Was it A. W.A. Robinson, B. G.W. Carver, C. Roy A. Lee, or D. Betty Fairfax? So one of those principles basically went against the status quo and increased the quality of education. And who was that? All right. Who was the attorney that represented 3 students in the 1952? I want to stress that as we go into the answers. Segregation lawsuit, Phillips versus Phoenix Union High School. A. Henry Watkins, B. Hazel B. Daniels, C. Lincoln Ragsdale, or D. Brenda Thompson?
I'm remarkably well preserved to be born
Well,
in.
that's why I wanted to really stress that in 1952. Because, I mean, you know, some guys have
I
worked
resent
themselves into
putting
the
my
answer.
name in the choices.
So,
I'm flattered by the company, though, I must say.
all right. So question 9. In 1953, who said a half century of intolerance is enough? Was that A. Judge Rayner C. Collins, B. Attorney Herb Finn, C. Judge Fred Strunkmeyer, or D. Governor Samuel P. Goddard? All right. So who said a half century of intolerance is enough back in 53? All right. And in what year did the George Washington Carver High School close its doors for good? That was it A, 1950, B, 1954, C, 1960, or D, 1964? So which one of those years did Carver officially close its doors? All right. So, you know, get ready because, you know, as you're gathering up your answers, don't lick your plate if you wrote it on there with chocolate syrup because you'll ruin all your chances of winning a prize at the end. And so we do take a little bit of an Arizona music break. And so tonight we are going to talk about Charles Mingus, born in 1922 in Nogales, Arizona. Now, he's a jazz musician, composer, band leader, and civil rights activist. He is considered to be one of the greatest jazz musicians and composers in history. With a career spanning more than 3 decades, working with legends such as Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, and Herbie Hancock. Now, though he was born in Nogales, he was born on the military base, but he mainly grew up in the Watts area of LA. Now, his mom only allowed church music to be played in the house, but he would hear music on the radio and became enamored with Duke Ellington. And he studied the cello, and he wasn't able to pursue that professionally because at the time it was nearly impossible for a Black musician to make a career as a classic musician. And the cello at that point was not an accepted jazz instrument. Now, after he passed away, after being on 40 plus records, his wife Sue started Let Children Hear Music, which basically keeps his legacy alive through publishing, education, archival presentation, and performance. And the Library of Congress acquired his archives, which was a first for jazz, first for an African-American composer, as well. He also left behind the largest legacy of composition in American music right after Duke Ellington. So I think that's pretty cool. I didn't realize he was born right here in Arizona. All right. So who is, first off, it's time for cheers. I like how Brenda said they're drinking her water.
Yeah.
And Paul,
Hey, it's the desert. Water is important.
It is. And so, Paul, what are you drinking this evening?
I am drinking a Blue Moon Light Sky.
Ah, good choice. All right. So, in what year did the George Washington Carver High School building officially open to students? C, back in 1926. So I think for me, one of the interesting things is that it really was the only school like that in the area. And so my friend Ruth Ann, who, when her family migrated here from Texas, her dad came here because he found a flyer that said, hey, cotton pickers needed in Arizona. So he came here. They moved to Chandler. And so she had a 2-hour bus ride each way to get to school every day. Mm-hmm. And she always said, she only made it through high school because of a very patient bus driver who understood the importance of education. Because on those mornings when she was sluggish, he would wait for her to get on the bus and make sure she got to school, which I think is pretty impressive.
Well, and regarding the 1926, in the early days of the school, a lot of the students, they had to cross train tracks to get to school. And then also the teachers and the principal and the parent all had to take the children to the school because they didn't have any way of transportation. They weren't, they didn't have any funding. Yes,
no school buses.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh.
It's funny too, because you look at the pictures, I know it's black and white, and the building is, to me, when I look at it now, it reminds me a bunch of schools in the East Coast where I grew up, where they're big buildings with tall windows, but it still was at that time not really a very nice neighborhood.
No.
And so part of the reason why the parents were accompanying their children was for their personal safety. Mm-hmm. It was kind of an industrial part of town. Yep. It wasn't as beautiful and well cared for as some of the white neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. And so although it was treated with care and the school was loved, it was where they were allowed to have a school because they weren't included in the Phoenix Union School District.
Yep. And I remember actually finding articles talking about the fact that people were saying this is not a safe area for a school. Why are you putting it here? Mm-hmm. And they still did. Mm-hmm. All right. Question 2. Who was the first principal at Carver High? A, Mrs. C.B. Caldwell.
She was also the first teacher. When the Phoenix Union School District created the colored department in 1912, they hired her as the first teacher. And as the students grew and they hired more teachers and they inevitably built the school in 1926, they placed her as the principal. And so she was the first teacher and the first principal. It's kind of cool.
So it could have been a trick question.
Yes,
see,
absolutely.
Okay. We didn't pull that. Sometimes we do. All right. And the Carver High School mascot was the Monarchs.
The Monarchs, yep. All the yearbooks, they depict this little lion dancing. You can see, these are both from the yearbook. This one's from 1954 yearbook. The one with the two dancing is from 1954 yearbook. And the one with just the lion is from from the late 40s. But I got those out of the yearbook, and it was really cool. Just how they depict themselves.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I love old yearbooks for that reason because it's so interesting to see how the students viewed themselves, their community, and all kinds of things. Now, is that also the name of the group that created the Carver Museum?
Yes, the Monarch Alumni Association. They were the ones that created the museum and bought the building from the school district to create the museum and cultural center.
So now we do have a question. Do we know if students drew these photos or these images?
I don't know. I know the name of the artist the last name is Emerson, but I'm not entirely sure if that's a student or if that was someone else.
Okay.
I'll find out though.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's half the fun, is just kind of like, oh. So
I actually was a yearbook nerd when I was in high school. And so when I look at those drawings, it's the people that are behind the scenes taking all the pictures and doing the layout for the yearbook that either do the drawings or find an artist in school to do it. So my money is, when we find out, I'll bet another Tokidoki cactus dog that it had to be a student who drew those pictures.
Right. I mean, I also love looking just the layout of some of those little yearbooks, because I mean, they really got creative with how it wasn't just let's put everything on a square. I mean, they had a lot of fun with the layout long before it was digital, and they could just click a button and move a mouse and make things move. So very old school. All right. The Carver Monarchs won multiple state championships in which sport? Oh my gosh, all of the above.
All of the above. In the 40s and the 50s is when the basketball team, the track, baseball, the band, it's when they started winning all these statewide awards. And we'll be creating on our website, carveraz.org, we'll be creating a whole exhibit on there for people to visit. It should be up in the next 60 days, about all the sport teams and the extracurricular activities of the students. So you have to make sure to go check it out then.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, because I mean, it's like, I mean, you guys have all kinds of great stuff down there.
Yeah.
You're actually looking at some of the trophies that we have that people donated.
Yes.
When I was talking to a friend, and he said his mom always said, whenever we played Carver, we expected to get trounced.
That's a good reputation to have.
Exactly. All right. So Carver High School educator acclaimed for his art, and that would be Eugene Grigsby.
Yes. That the photo on the left is him in his art class with some of his students, and then the photo on the right is from when they placed the 16th Street Baptist bombing, the Birmingham 16th Street Baptist bombing statues in the courtyard, and that's him with Calvin Good, Eugene Grisby, Mrs. Grisby, and Princess Crump.
I know. It's like I was looking. It's like, oh my gosh! It's like I know all those people. How cool is that? So yeah.
I hope we will get to talk about him a little bit more later on, because he's one of those people who his lifetime contributions to Arizona is just stellar.
Very much so. And then also, I mean, the fact that you have those Waddell statues in the courtyard is pretty amazing.
Yes. Yeah. It's an honor to have those. We also have actually an exhibit online, again, on our website, carveraz.org. We have an exhibit on there about the statues, explaining each figure and what they mean.
Oh, I guess I should go to that website more often, because I didn't realize there was an online exhibit about them. So
that's thanks to Paul's creation, because when we were, like many museums in Arizona, forced to close our doors due to the COVID pandemic, one of the things we realized is the people that would come to typically walk through, the school buses with kids that would come to visit, we couldn't do that. And so we wanted to make sure that they could still not only know that we were here, but learn about African-American contributions to culture in Arizona by having a place to see it. And so he started creating virtual exhibits online last summer, and is continuing to add to those. Yes. And our goal is to add more virtual exhibits and podcasts in the future, but he's the one who's been digging through our historical papers, books, artifacts, and all of those things, trying to create virtual experiences for people to view not only in Arizona, but across the US and across the world.
It's an honor for me. I love doing it. It's an honor to be there. So thank you.
And Marshall, I know you know this because you're the hip historian. I think people think of that as a kitschy thing, but the beauty of Marshall, and why I love Marshall, this is a Marshall moment, is because he makes history relevant. It's not just a subject that you study in school or dust off a book and then never think about it. He makes us think about what is around us every day. And so history is made that way. The things that people have in their homes, the experiences, the artifacts. I mean, he started this program showing us his kitchen. That was like a time capsule. That was not a modern kitchen. And so many people have never seen stoves like that, refrigerators like that. And I think what you do is you make history exciting and interesting and accessible. You don't have to be in a college classroom. You don't have to go to a museum. You can learn about history anywhere, and then appreciate things that you may not have seen or touched that someone else thinks is important. You learn about other people's lives. And you're also, I would call you like a combination hip historian, history detective, because Marshall has been all over the state of Arizona. He does hop in his car and go to the tiniest towns, no matter how far away they are. He meets people from everywhere. I know this because at Arizona Humanities, has been one of our speakers in our Arizona Speaks lecture series. And one of the most popular people, sometimes 150 people would show up for a lecture because he would tell them about ghost stories and cemeteries and, lost loves and trinkets. And I think what people forget is he's telling all of our stories. And so I love this program. I love being invited to be a guest, but I also love what Marshall does every day because he makes people understand that history is important.
Thank you, Brenda. All right. And so now you know, okay, so why on the bar did I have a couple of Viewmasters? And that is for Charles Harrison, who was a graduate of Carver and then went on. Brenda, would you do me a favor and type the address in the chat session?
Oh, sure.
Because my friend, what was that website?
415 East Grant Street in downtown Phoenix. I'm happy to do that.
Website.
It's www.carveraz.org. So it's very short, carveraz.org.
And so, so Charles Harrison was, it is an amazing character in just industrial design for Arizona. And so not only did he create one of my favorite childhood memories, which is a Viewmaster.
Mine too. Yep.
I mean, he didn't do the Bakelite one. He did the mid 60s, kind of that angular, the chocolate milk one is over here. The bicentennial version is there, but he also, so the Smithsonian did an amazing book on this man about his design. And so I've always heard Carver had some things that were donated that were his work. And so we're actually getting a chance to see what they've got. You've got that plastic wastebasket.
Yes, it was the non-clinking garbage bin. Because before that, they used the metal ones. And so he designed the first plastic one.
Yeah. And then there's an amazing hair dryer.
Yes, the hair dryer. Yes, it was sold in the Sears catalog. I believe it was $29.99.
And I also love how it's got a little manicure kit attached to it as well. So you could give yourself a manicure while you were sitting under that bubble, not hearing anything.
Absolutely.
And then there's that gorgeous radio.
Yes. It's a Silverstone radio. Silverstone is a Sears brand also. He designed all these products and many more.
Yeah, and that's the amazing thing is I love that we have this design history. I was just talking to another artist we were talking about designers, and I was like, Charles Harrison. He's like, who's that? I'm like, oh my gosh, you've got to know this guy.
Oh yeah.
So, yeah. All right. So back in 1954, after years of budget shortfalls, this principal challenged the status quo, and that was A.W. Robinson.
Yes, this man, he came in from Texas, and he was he was part of the Rockefeller Foundation, and they brought him in 1945 to work with Carver. And at the time, Carver was having several budget shortfalls. It was described as they were borrowing sport equipments. They were borrowing musical equipments. They had volunteers teach these things. And when he came in, he, with the support of the community, went to the school district and demanded and asked for more funding and more support to raise the quality of education that was provided at Carver. So it's thanks to this gentleman here that we have those championships, the sport championships later, and the band awards, it's because of the work that he did and the fight that he took up with the school district to bring in funding for the school.
Ah, very cool. All right, on to question 8. Who was the attorney that represented 3 students in the 52 segregation lawsuit, Phillips v. Phoenix Union High School?
Yes.
Oh, it's not Brenda?
No, and
It was
actually,
not.
Shocked that it's not.
it's Hazel B. Daniels. It's actually spelled Z-E-L. And I learned about him as a young lawyer coming to practice in Arizona for the first time when I became a member of the Black Bar Association, and learned about who some of the folks were who were really challenging segregation laws. And he was doing that in Phoenix before Brown versus the Board of Education.
Yes.
So Arizona was actually ahead of the curve. And my understanding was he was a football player. He was a revered community and civic leader, and one of the first Black lawyers.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
Oh, very cool.
It's kind of nice to think we were ahead of Brown versus the Board of Education.
I know, isn't that fun? A year before.
Right. All right. So in 53, who said a half century of intolerance is enough? And that would be Judge Fred Strunkmeyer.
Yes.
I have to say that as a lawyer, I really appreciate the different lawyers and judges that you mentioned. I don't know if people will recognize all of their names from the Trivial Pursuit, but Judge Finn, obviously, Hazel B. Daniels, Judge Strunkmeyer.
Yep.
We really owe a great debt to those folks, because just like Thurgood Marshall and some of the famous people that you learned about who helped Black people access public facilities, schools, water fountains, libraries, these are the people who did it. And I had the pleasure of meeting Elizabeth Finn, who was his daughter. And she talked about what her memories were. And he knew Hazel B. Daniels. And often they would go out to eat. And she said that he told a story of one time where they were in a restaurant. And these are times where people did not even want to serve Black people in restaurants. And so they begrudgingly served him. And after that, they broke each plate that they'd eaten off of, so that nobody else would ever eat off of the plate that a Black person had touched. And that was their symbolic way of resisting the changes in the law that he was putting forward. And so it was not just hard work, it was dangerous work, but they took it upon themselves to make sure that all the people that lived and worked in Arizona could access the things that their tax-paying dollars paid for. They were members of the public, but they were second-class citizens. And so judges like Strunkmeyer and Finn and Hazel B. Daniels made sure that the people who lived here could equally access those public spaces. It's very important. Can you tell I'm a lawyer? Woohoo, lawyers!
Well, it's almost like you went to Yale or some school like that.
Yeah, some second-rate school back east. What can you say?
All right. And our last question is, what year did the George Washington Carver High School close?
1954.
1954.
And it was actually a sad, great news because of the quality of education that was coming out of it. But it was a sad day because a lot of the community had formed a foundation, and there was a great community forming around the school. So while it was nice that more than nice, it was great that the education was being opened up. It was sad for the community that the students would be moving off to different schools and the teachers would be moving off to different schools. It was kind of like a separation in a way.
And it's really something that people experienced all over the country, because if you look at desegregation and how it occurred, there are many schools in the Deep South that were traditionally African American. All the staff, the principal, everybody literally took care of the people because they were the children of the people that lived in those towns. And so when desegregation occurred, and perhaps you could access better resources, better libraries, better materials, but the trade-off was, again, sometimes having to travel a great distance or being in schools where you actually experience more severe racism. And so you could be separated, called names by your peers, be ostracized, not have access to the same spaces and safe spaces in school. I always think about it when I think about being a kid. I look at the picture that Norman Rockwell did. I don't know if you remember the famous picture of the little Black girl holding the books, and she's walking into a school, and behind her is standing a National Guardsman. That experience is, you're off into this new brave world, and you're going to be able to learn and experience new things, but you actually need the protection of a National Guardsman for you to be safe in a public school. And so it's not always as dramatic as that, but what it means is there's a cost, and then I would also say and argue, even though it hasn't always been portrayed to as such, a benefit. Because if you look at the benefits of diversity and how multicultural many schools are, the benefit of getting to meet children of all different races from all different backgrounds. And so when I look at pictures that my staff person, Samantha, shows me of her son, Link, his classmates are every color. And they're building Lego castles together, and they're black, white, and Japanese, and, Latino, and what they are is friends. And that would never have been possible without the desegregation that took place. And so I'm grateful for that, despite the cost.
Indeed. All right. So now we get a list. So how did everyone do? So I know we had lots of people who were throwing out right answers. So did anyone get 10 out of 10? And so if you did, we actually have some prizes. So for those that did that, it's like, so we have to wait a few seconds because there's like a 12-second delay, I think, between what we're seeing and what the folks on Facebook Live are seeing. So there's a bit of a delay. So, and if you did not get 10 out of 10, there is no shame in that at all, because guess what? Now you know the answers.
And what will you do, Marshall? Will you pick random winners if we have more than people and try to, I don't know if we have as many cactus dogs as we have people who got the correct answers.
Well, and I love that Sarah picked up that one of the questions, the next question answered it.
That's correct.
Yes.
So yeah. So, all right. So, so what we'll do is, so did anyone get 5 out of, see, Pam got 5 out of 10. Perfect.
Good job.
All right.
Are you writing these down, Marshall? I won't remember the winners.
So no, what I'm going to ask them to do is actually, so Pam, if you can email me your address, I will make sure that you get one of those beautiful Tokidoki cactus dogs. Now, in my collection, I have a Tokidoki cactus dog, but it's attached to Hello Kitty. So that's a whole other. Oh, Sarah got 7 out of 10. Sarah, send me your email or send me your address, and I will make sure that you get a Tokidoki cactus dog as well. Oh, and I see Todd is here. So Todd, did you get any right? I don't mean to call people out, but Todd, did you get any right?
I saw a couple people get 5 out of 10 as well.
So, okay. So Anita, send me your address. I know I have it, but if you can send it to me, that would be great. And we will get you a dog as well. So, all right.
And I see Pam Murphy got 5 out of 10 as well.
Yeah, so I asked Pam to send me your address, Anita and Sarah. And and Todd, send me your address. You're getting, just because you're here and you're having fun, you get a Tokidoki cactus dog.
And Marshall, I was hoping, I know we don't have a huge amount of time left, but I wanted to tell people a little bit more about Eugene Grigsby. And mostly it's because so many of these people I've only read about, but I actually had the opportunity to meet Eugene Grigsby. He was an elderly gentleman by that time, and a friend of yours, a mutual friend of ours, Professor Neil Lester, arranged for me to have lunch with him at his home. And I just tell you, it was really quite amazing. He lived in a tiny little house in Phoenix, and when you walked in, if you know how people have like a little mud room where you just walk up the stairs and you can see where people put their shoes. I looked to the left, and there are these drawings, little drawings, 10 by 12, what are on the wall, and they were by famous artists. So when I was an undergraduate at Yale and took an African American arts class, I would see these names of these famous people. Well, these were friends of Eugene Grigsby's. They swapped drawings with each other, and they were just stuck on the wall. I was like, oh my gosh, it would be like if you were friends with Picasso and you just put his picture on the wall next to your boots. So it's pretty amazing. And then, of course, he had paintings all over his home. He was, even though he's elderly and he was in a wheelchair, he was still painting almost every day. And so he was just such a gracious person, so kind. And if you think about it, we often think someone was just a local person. He actually settled here after he'd fought in World War II and chose Phoenix as his home. But he had studied in a number of different places. He had studied at Ohio State. He got his master's degree there. He got his PhD from New York University. He had even studied at the École des Beaux-Arts in Marseille, France. And so the fact that he could come here and be somebody who was teaching young Black students about art was pretty amazing. And even then, he was somebody who was what I would call a creative genius. He wrote a book that was about art and ethics, and it was for teachers, and it was teaching them about youth in a pluralistic society. And even those are fancy, big school, terms, what he was really talking about was how to make sure that people thought about their own heritage and that was reflected in their work. So he was decades ahead of time when it came to respecting the heritage and diversity of students in American society, and he encouraged them to reflect that in their art. So it's pretty amazing that he's somebody who was here right in Phoenix. We actually have some of his artwork at Carver. So when we can open our doors again, you can actually come to see it. And I think if you can do that, it's really important because many decades of his life was spent here in Arizona when he was somebody who could have traveled the globe to do what he was doing. And the other person I would mention, and I think the person who opened the program before you came on the screen talked about how Black History Month was important, but it was something that we look at year round. I would stress that too, because before there was a Black History Month, there was a Black History Week in 1926. Black History Month didn't come about, I believe, until I think it was 1970. And what I would want to leave people with, if they have one thought about this month, is that there's no such thing as Black History Month. Black history is American history, and it's year-round. So even though it's really wonderful to pay homage to it during February, you can learn about Black history any day of the year, 365 days of the year, because it's really important to think about it that way. And this person who Carver was named after, George Washington Carver, is again one of those people that if you get a chance, go online, learn a little bit more about his background and history. But can I just say this one thing that is to me so amazing about him in terms of all of the things that he's known for? He was actually born into slavery. And when I was doing my research about him, what I learned was that when he was 1 week old, he, his mother, and his sister were kidnapped by people who stole other people's slaves. And so most of them could not be found ever again. But his owner, who was a German immigrant, I believe his name was Moses Carver, was able to get George back. And so the man who had purchased his parents, and then George Moses had purchased them, was able to get the baby back and raised him along with his brother as their own. And his wife actually taught him to read and write. And so it's pretty amazing that somebody who lost his parents, could never find them again, could be somebody who was viewed as a genius. In fact, I think Times Magazine said that he was like a modern day, Leonardo da Vinci, or somebody who was that much of a genius in terms of his scientific contributions, his research, his art, his love of people. He was actually somebody who was talking about sustainability before the phrase was ever coined. And he was somebody who was looking at the soil, which had been really depleted because people were just growing cotton over and over again. By planting other plants, he realized that it could put nutrients back into the soil. And why this was so important was because eventually when slaves were freed and they had tiny little plots of land, the land was worthless because nothing could grow on it. And what he was teaching them was how to plant other plants so that the land could be sustainable and viable again, and they could actually eat the food that they were growing, sell it, and feed their families. instead of being on land that couldn't sustain them. So that's just a tiny little tip of the iceberg. But to think that somebody could come from such humble beginnings and change the trajectory of our country with his ingenuity was pretty amazing, because he tried and would go to school after school after school that would reject him because they wouldn't accept Black students. And eventually he found a place that he could go to school and learn. And he was like that. He always found a way to go to school. And I found what was interesting about his name, I'm forgetting the woman that he met, but he introduced himself to her at one of the schools that he was at as Carver's George. Carver's George. And she said, no, you're George Carver. He was introducing himself by the master, the name of the master who had raised him. And the reason why it's so touching is because he took that name and made it his own, but his story is not unusual. There are many Black people in America today whose names are the result of who they descended from through slavery. So when you hear Black people named Thomas, Jefferson, Washington, they often were people who were on plantations, who were slaves, and they're descendants of those slaves. They did not come from Africa bearing Christian names. And so even if they became Christian people eventually, that's because of the heritage of slavery that they were born of. And so I thought that was an interesting artifact, but also I thought it was a point of pride to know that somebody who had such a thirst for learning could make an education for himself. And I think one of the things that I thought was that both Carver and Grigsby had in common was they came from such humble beginnings. I think Grigsby was delivering newspapers, and someone opened the door and he saw pictures hanging on the wall, and he asked about them. And the man was a renowned sculptor and artist, and he started taking Grigsby under his wing and teaching him how to draw. And who would know that humble beginnings would be leading to somebody being a world-renowned, artist. And I think the same thing with Carver. He had very much had an interest in learning. And so it is not common for a slave owner to teach a slave to read and write. And his wife did that. And that was the beginning of her recognizing his love and learning knowledge and interest. And remember, at the beginning of our history, it was illegal to teach a slave to read. You could be punished, and so to think that there are people who just did that, who didn't care, meant that they recognized the common humanity of people and the decency of people. And I think that that's really important, because if there's ever a mission associated with Carver Museum, is that Carver cares to share the contributions of African American people with the world. So not just here in Arizona, with the things that you pointed out, the Viewmasters and trash cans and all of these things and their sports accomplishments, but the contributions that they have contributed that we've all benefited from in our daily lives. And I think, we've in recent years gotten to see a little bit more of the contributions of African Americans when we see stories, like The Help. We see movies of The Butler. We see who worked in the White House. We see who worked at NASA and Hidden Figures and got astronauts home safely. We see people who've invented or conducted the first successful brain surgeries and have invented all kinds of things that typically were not taught to us in our ordinary education in elementary school or high school at the turn of the century, because Black people's contributions just weren't recognized. And so this is an opportunity to take a look at our history with a fresh set of eyes to learn about what we missed. And it's true for me as well, because it doesn't matter whether you go to an Ivy League school or a public school, or if you haven't been to college at all, when you go back and look, many of these subjects are either missing, or the way they were taught, you do not learn the stories through the eyes of the people who experienced them. And so I love that Marshall started by talking about someone who went to school here and had a 2-hour bus ride. That's someone who remembers what it was like to be a Carver. And what Paul and I are hoping to do in the future is capture some of those stories. I know some people have passed away, but many people are living and their children are living. And so we're going to be capturing some of those stories in podcasts so you can listen to them, talk about what it was like to live here, and if they were picking cotton, where they picked cotton, where they went to school, where they played sports, how they became judges or lawyers or teachers or doctors or musicians or gardeners or principals. There's a very deep and rich history. There's no way for us to land here today without the people that set the stage for the children of the future. And so not only do we owe a great debt, but it's also why when Paul and I get together at Carver, the hardest part is just doing the work without having fun, because it's impossible to pick up a book in the library and you'll see a book from the 1800s right alongside a Jet magazine or an Oprah magazine. And it represents the full spectrum of where we've come from, and hopefully a future that is not yet written of what we can become, because Carver is really right in the heart of a burgeoning business, arts, and cultural district. And our dreams for Carver are big. We're not interested in having just a museum. We want a space that people can come to, that they can learn, attend lectures and events, and attend conferences and workshops, attend concerts, be able to go to a learning lab and learn about college prep and coding, and how to be able to access materials that are digital from the Phoenix Burton Bar Library and across the country, to be able to see digital programming, and if you're in an exhibit room, not just read about what's on the wall and in good cases, but to actually see and hear docent-led tours like the kind that Paul is creating, to learn about artifacts that are physically here, and also African-American artifacts that are other places in the world. So there's so many things that we're working on. And of course, the other routine things like lighting and security and garden spaces and parking and all those things. But we want to make sure that the Carver Museum is growing and represents the full scope and dreams and vision of the people who first, built it, and to make sure that we honor them with where we are in the future. So I hope that people who attended had fun. I hope when our doors are open again for visits in person, they'll come see us. But in the meantime, they'll check out our website at carveraz.org. Check out our calendar. We'll have a whole bunch more Black History Month activities on the calendar after Monday that are happening here and around the country. And then also, hopefully, if you have time and are interested, check out the mural that just went up in Arizona Republic today. It features Carver, and it shows a picture of the Black History Matters mural that went up this weekend, featuring Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, and of course, George Washington Carver. There's 28 murals that are being put up during Black History Month. I mean, literally, they're created. And they're featuring some of the people we just talked about, both people that are famous and some unsung heroes. And then you'll also see activities that are happening all over Arizona. We hope that you'll join us on Monday. If you watch television at all, you may be familiar with Jelani Cobb, and that's spelled Jelani, Cobb, C-O-B-B. And he's a famous Black journalist. And he's going to talk about whose vote counts, the history of elections, voting, and race in America, then and now. What does it mean for our future? He's a really dynamic speaker, and the reason we're able to have him join us is because we're partnering with the University of Arizona, and also through a special grant from the Mellon Foundation. And so it's free. All you have to do is go to the calendar and click on it, and you can watch it in your own home. That'll be 4 p.m. Arizona time. And of course, we hope to do more things in partnership with Carver in the future so that you can experience incredible art, music, history, and literature that's happening around the country. And that will be year round, not just for Black History Month.
And in case there was any question, I just threw up. So Melia actually threw up the website. So it is indeed carveraz.org. And you can go there, find the calendar, and click on Monday's program, and you can attend for free.
And Melia, I love you for doing that. Send him your address so I can send you a little green cactus dog. I consider that advocacy for Carver. Thank you.
So indeed. So, oh my gosh. And, and I love, it was like, so when I was chatting actually with Paul earlier, what was really kind of cool was there we go. So I could see that I knew he was at Carver, but it was like, I was like, couldn't quite. And then I was like, and that's because the wall colors are a little different. So, I mean, I love that there's, they're just these small changes happening. They're just saying, hey, we're getting ready for when people can walk through the door. But until then, hop on virtually and learn yourself some history.
And you'll see all these exhibit spaces are being updated. We're literally painting, we have new pedestals that were donated by the Musical Instrument Museum. We'll have new benches, all the things you don't think about when you go to a museum. At the end of the room there, you can see that long rectangular room. At the end, close to the furthest away, is where you're going to see a digital smart TV where you can actually watch exhibits and view docent-led tours. And at the opposite end, which you can't see, we'll also be able to conduct interviews and do podcasts. And then, of course, the exhibits will change. And so you'll be able to see different things. We have an African-American doll collection with over 300 dolls that's going to be displayed. And of course, we have sports artifacts and memorabilia, musical instruments, a number of different things. And hopefully some traveling exhibits as well that will come through, very similar to the Negro Baseball League exhibit that was there in February, just before the pandemic hit. We cut the exhibit short. We would love to be able to bring some of those things back so people can spend more time and learn a little bit more about that history.
Well, and so one of the things I also loved, especially when I would bring students through, was not just the ice box, but as you look at now, everyone just hits a button on their phone and it plays music. How did people record things back in the day? And I loved that there was an old wire recorder there with actually some of those wire recordings, and they were of church sermons.
That's correct.
And I always highlighted that because people I'm trying to think when it was like CDs were already kind of on the outs when I think brought the last group in through Carver. But I always pointed that out because I was like, look, this little thin piece of wire has sound on it. Mm-hmm. And they were always so amazed by not how people lived a long time ago, but just how their lives have changed so much.
I think also one of the things that's renowned is the statues of the four girls that you mentioned.
Yeah.
They're actually in an interior courtyard. So even though it's this big, huge building, over 70,000 square feet, if you looked at the center of the O downward, even from the second floor, you can see in the courtyard the statues of the four girls. And it was depicting them as young women, as if they had not been killed, if they had not been murdered, what they would have looked like. And they're stretching and reaching upward and looking upward to the sun and to the sky. And so it's kind of nice that out of such a tragic event, because the bombing in Birmingham, Alabama, grew out of racial hatred. A person was planting bombs all over the place, and literally it went off. And the girls that were murdered were largely in the basement. It was before Sunday school. And I know from the stories, you can listen to the stories, and there's many famous movies, including one that was done by Spike Lee. One girl went upstairs, and that was the last time she saw her sister. I can't remember if she was going to get a hairbrush or a hair clip, and heard a loud noise. I actually had, through a National Humanities Conference, the opportunity to meet some of the people who grew up in Birmingham who remembered it. And there had been construction in the area, so people at first thought it was just construction noise. But then it became very clear that a bomb had gone off. And so everybody came running, parents, neighbors, etc. And very much like when you see disasters on TV, they were pulling out bricks and chunks of cement by hand, trying to get to the children who were in the Sunday school basement when the bomb went off. And so in Spike Lee's movie, he actually interviews the children who are now grown, talking about what it was like that day and how they were still tragically affected. The girl who lost her sister to this day remembers walking to school with her, holding her hand, and then that was the last time that she ever saw her. And then other people talked about finding them and how horrific it was. Spike Lee, in his film, it's not like graphic movies or anything you see today. It's just silhouettes so you can see the little girls. But some of them could not have open caskets because their bodies were so badly damaged because of the building coming down on them. And the transition, which gives me hope, is the same hope that I have for our country now. If you visit Birmingham, you'll see that the school is vibrant. There are children laughing and playing. There's a civil rights museum right next door that chronicles the history. You can see Rosa Parks in a simulated bus and hear about the history of her refusing to give up her seat in the beginning of that part of the civil rights movement. You can walk through and see what an elementary school classroom looked like where kids attended school. You can see a Ku Klux Klan robe donated by a family who was a member of the Ku Klux Klan during that day and time. And so you can learn about the complex history of our country. Democracy takes work. Democracy is not a given if you care about justice, if you care about freedom, if you care about humanity, and if you value human lives. You have to fight for it. And I think when I think about places like Carver, when I think about George Washington Carver and Eugene Grigsby and Hazel B. Daniels and Herb Finn and Elizabeth Finn, the people from fighting for civil rights and for fighting for democracy came in all different colors, from all different places around the country, including many young people who were freedom riders, who went into the Deep South, who sat at lunch counters, who desegregated stores and restaurants. They were often met with more than just catcalls. They were met with physical violence, but they fought to make sure that our country was safe and that people could access public services and privileges and go to school and work alongside one another. So I don't think that we should forget that. I think that we should remember how important that is and how people from all over the world want to come to the United States because they have never seen democracy or don't experience it in their lifetimes. And I feel like it's worth us not forgetting that. And if ever there is a symbol of that, it is Carver then and Carver now. And I think what will be most amazing is the Carver of the future that we have not yet seen, that you're just starting to see a little bit of, because it will be a very vibrant place for people to gather, learn, play, enjoy each other's company, meet poets, authors, musicians, see some of these artifacts. I'm hoping that you'll be there sometime and that we'll connect with students who are museum studies students from Arizona State University and U of A and the community colleges, and that they will actually help us capture these stories, that they will help us interview and look at and preserve the architecture and the landmarks that are part of the space, but also the stories of the people. Because without people, there can be no democracy. And I think that is the beauty of the humanities and the beauty of history. It's the stories of all of us. And I'm sure I'm stealing someone else's quote, but it's American history. And so that is all of our stories that we're trying to capture and that we don't want to forget. That is the fabric of America. And that is what democracy is all about.
Thank you, Brenda. So one of the joys of doing this also is getting a chance to see friends that I might not have seen in, gosh, I think in some cases almost decades. And so my friend Terry from Phoenix Revitalization Corporation,
yes,
who was foundational in part of my early days in Phoenix and Central City South. She was talking about how Eugene Grigsby not only taught at Carver, but also at ASU.
That's absolutely where he landed. And by the way, his artwork is still displayed there. I don't know if it's always in the same place, but in the 411 building downtown, they used to have artwork in one of the public areas that you could literally walk through, and his art was on the walls. So it's pretty amazing that in other places you'd have to go to a museum, ASU has his work. And then the Arizona Community Foundation also honored him, and his work was displayed there as well. So it's in a lot of different places, and there's also some pictures that he donated to Carver. I know one picture that was in the library and another was in the main hall. And what we're hoping to do is to be able to display more of his work alongside with history, a curated history of his things that he donated. He donated much of his life's papers and history to Carver. And so Paul is actually going through everything, cataloging them. So even though his art has made its way around the world, there is actually some that is right here in Arizona that we can still see and appreciate firsthand.
Wow, I didn't realize that his papers were there.
They are.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh. So again, thank you so much, you two, for coming on and talking about this history that not a lot of people, I mean, I'm always amazed that people grew up here and didn't know about Carver. I mean, I was just down there the other day doing a bit for Cronkite School. that is supposed to be up. They haven't sent me any dates yet, but like mid-February. And it was just kind of randomly across the valley talking about some different spots of history. And I was like, well, if you got to go downtown back to drop off the vehicle and the equipment, I was like, why don't we stop by Carver? And they were like, oh, it's right there. I'm like, yeah, you're steps away from all this history.
And there's very few African-American museums. I think there's like, there may be 4 or 5 Carver museums in the United States. There's 2 African-American museums, I would call them museums, that were historic schools or places that have been converted into such. And the other is the Dunbar Pavilion in Tucson, which also is pretty amazing. It's further along in its sort of reintegration into the community. And so there's actually kids that can still go to school there. The kitchen is actively used to teach people to develop trade school chef skills. And they also do catering there. They have events, special events, and classes, and poetry workshops, and films, all kinds of things happening there. And so it's also a pretty amazing space. And it's really, when we are finished, we hope to have, half the beauty and impact that Dunbar does. And then what's unique to us in this neck of the woods in Phoenix. But it's pretty impressive. And I think what people will come to learn is that people will come from all over the United States to see it, because there's just not many places like this that are left. People have torn them down. And the fact that this is preserved and is on the National Historic Register is why it's still standing, and that we have the ability to develop it. There's a trade school to the left. There's a grandstand that's still intact, and then the museum proper itself, and warehouse space. And so you'll see it re-envisioned and reimagined, but the building itself is tremendous. It's huge and it's solid, and it's quite beautiful, but it will be even more beautiful in time.
So again, thank you two so much for coming on and sharing.
Thank you, Marshall.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm sending you virtual kisses.
Very good. All right. Well, you two have a great night.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Brenda.
We hope to see you all soon.
Indeed. All right. So, you might have been wondering, when I first asked you to share, it's like, why should I share? And so, I'll ask again. You might not have shared initially because you're like, what is this show? Well, now that you've seen it, I hope you'll be even more inclined to click on that share button and let your friends know that we are sharing some really amazing history. Now, our next portion is one near and dear to my heart, and it is sponsored by the First Families of Arizona. So you can track them down on Facebook under the First Families of Arizona, or under their acronym TFFOA.org. And so Little Arizona. So, I talk about how I came from New York, but, I originally grew up in a small town in Indiana of about 25 people. There were more people on the floor of my first apartment in New York than in my entire town. And so I'm also working on a book called Little Arizona, exploring kind of that small town across Arizona. And so I was researching one town that I was going to talk about tonight. And literally, I think it was about 1:30, I called the Arizona Heritage Center, which is part of the Arizona Historical Society, to ask a question. And they said, well, what about this town? And I'm like, oh, I've not heard of that. So we are going to talk about McNary, Arizona, which is Apache County, a little bit Navajo County, but a population of look at that exact number, about 672. So under 700 people. And it was famous. It's actually the second highest community in Arizona at 7,316 feet. Now, originally, this community was named after Benjamin Clough, who was a Mormon bishop that grew a hay there in the 1870s. Around the 20s, it changed to Cooley in honor of Corydon Cooley, who was kind of an Arizona trailblazer. And in the mid-20s, it was purchased by the Katy Lumber Company out of McNary, Louisiana. And that's when the town became McNary. Now, the promise of steady work, good living conditions, great weather, as we saw today, lured 700 hopeful Black migrants to McNary, Arizona from Louisiana. And as the company grew, Hispanics, Anglos, Apaches all moved to McNary. Now, each group had its own part of town, so it was segregated. They had their own churches, their own schools, and the African American section was called the quarters. Now, the lumberyard went through several changes, and here we have a photo of two of the workers who are working with a derailed train back in 1960 in McNary. And so this was the find of the day. Oh my gosh. I mean, so excited. Now, there was a fire that destroyed the mill in about 1979, so not a lot of that history is left. But, one of the things we always talk about is some of these small towns, in some ways, a lot of times the only thing that remains is a cemetery. But as I was researching cemetery, I kept finding these anomalies and came across not just McNary Cemetery, but it looks like there may also be the Ponderosa Pines Cemetery, as well as then this was likely attached as a parcel of the church. And so this is the African American cemetery. The only photos I could find recently, and I would say recently in that very heavy quotations, because these are about mid-80s. So I really am looking to take a road trip out there to see what we can find. But you can see that the headstones are all wood and there is a picket fence around. And so I'm hoping that some of those survived, as well as with the wood, they took nails and hammered that in to basically, that's how they could leave a headstone and be decorative. So I'm really looking forward to get a chance to going to visit McNary and see what it's like today. There was not a lot of information out there about it. And so hello road trip. That's all I can say is soon I will be visiting there. It also still has transit from the Fort Apache connection. There is a bus that goes around and connects it. So very happy that that is still going on, and I will be happy to take that bus around town. So coming next week, we're going to talk about some really great things as well. We're going to talk a little bit about Legend City. Now, for you that grew up here, it was the amusement park, as well as the first outdoor shopping mall, which would have been Christown Mall. So we'll be having my friend John will be coming on doing trivia about those locations, as well as I'm sure much more. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And that is next Thursday at 7:00 right here on Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube. Now, remember, if you have any questions, stories, suggestions, or maybe you've been to McNary and have photos of what it actually looks like now, would love to hear. Or maybe you have an idea for a story. Let me know. You can do that either in the chat session here, or feel free to reach out to me on Facebook, Instagram, or even email. It's all good. And don't forget, we have our tour coming up on March 13th. I am happy to say, actually, on Saturday, I'm going to be actually at Grand Avenue. They are doing a pop-up market. And so I will have a variety of t-shirts and other things there. We'll have Mr. Lucky's on. I know there was an article in the New Times that I think came out today that talks about Mr. Lucky's and how it's up for sale again. And there is so much history. I am actually working on trying to get the original owner of Mr. Lucky's on as a guest. I will let you know how that progresses. So there is also my website, hiphistorian.com, so you could track me down there as well. As we get ready to close this amazing episode, I do want to give a shout out to both Paul and Brenda for, oh my gosh, I mean, I adore Carver so much, and it was so great to have them on and talking about such an amazing piece of history. As we leave you this evening, you'll be hearing Music from Mr. Ho, who is a Sunny Slope boy, who is now residing on the East Coast with his own orchestra. And always my cocktail advisor, PJ Vader Barron. And to start the show off, we had a video with music written by my friend Cole Travis, as well as video that was done by Chris Allen. So thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your night. And I look forward to seeing you right here next week as we get a chance to talk about some more Arizona history.